Cesar Estrada Chavez was the most important Latino in U.S. history, and we're about to tell you why millions of Latinos and Mexicans cheered Chavez, Chavez, Chavez at the top of their lungs. This is the story of one man who dedicated his life to improving treatment, pay, and working conditions for farm workers.
Cesar Estrada Chavez was born in Yuma, Arizona on March 31, 1927, to his lovely mother and father, Labrito Chavez and Joanna Chavez. He was the second of 5 children. They lived on a small farm, and he also ran a small country store, which helped him out a bit, but not enough. As the Depression intensified and years of drought forced them off the land, Cesar's father asked aid from a lawyer, who advised him to take out a loan to buy the land. When the family could not pay the interest on a loan, they lost everything, including their farm and the store, in 1937.
Cesar was only 10 years old when the family had no other choice but to pack up their bags and head for a long and rough journey to California. After going through all the wretched migrant camps, corrupt labor contractors, meager wages for back-breaking work, bitter racism, that is when Cesar knew that he had to do something before things got a little out of hand. Later, Cesar knew his destiny was to make a change for all of mankind.
These were difficult years, sleeping by the side of the road, moving from farm to farm, harvest to harvest, just to find a warm spot so your kids wouldn't freeze to death. Working all harvest long, making no more than $1 a day. The school situation for the children was not easy. Often the teachers were prejudiced against the Spanish-speaking student. Many of the teachers were neither friendly nor helpful because they knew the children would be moving from school to school. They thought teaching these children wasn't worth the effort.
As Cesar learned that nothing was free in life, and also that nothing was fair in the game of life, he learned important lessons from both his mother and father. As he progressed through his life, his father Librado taught him the value of hard work and opened his eyes to the harsh and cruel world of the farm labor system. His mother Juana, a deeply religious and passionate woman, emphasized the importance of caring for the less fortunate and the power of love.
In the early 1940s, the Chavez family settled in a small farm town called Delano, in California's San Joaquin Valley, where Cesar later spent his teenage years. At the age of 17, Cesar enlisted in the Navy and served in the Western Pacific near the end of World War II. A couple of years later, he described it as the worst 2 years of my life. After he was released from the Navy, he headed a long way back home, and when he returned to Delano, he married his one true lover, his high school sweetheart, Helen Falia.
Cesar and Helen moved to San Jose, where their first child, Fernando, was born. Over the years, the family would grow to include 7 children: Fernando, Linda, Paul, Eloise, Sylvia, and Anthony. As he regained his spirit and love for his wife, he soon got back to work. Chavez started working in the fields again, but this time he began to fight for a change in the conditions. That year, he participated in his first strike in protest of the low wages and poor working conditions.
Several days later, the workers were forced back into the fields. This was the beginning of a new chapter in history. In San Jose, Chavez met a local priest, Father Donald McDonald, who introduced him to the writings of St. Francis and Mahatma Gandhi. Any idea of nonviolence could be an active force for positive change, but he still needed to learn how to put these principles into action.
In 1953, a man named Fred Ross, who lived in San Jose, would teach Chavez how to put theory into practice. Fred Ross was an organizer. He was in San Jose looking to recruit members from the Community Service Organization. CSO helped its members with immigration and tax problems, and taught them how to organize to deal with problems like police violence and discrimination. Chavez didn't just see Ross as a teacher, but as the beginning of a lifelong friendship.
Chavez was rapidly making his way to the top, and soon became the president of CSO. When the organization turned down his request to organize farm workers in 1962, he resigned and returned with no success to Delano. From 1962 to 1965, Chavez crisscrossed the state talking to farm workers. His new organization, the National Farm Workers Association, or NFWA, would use the model of community service that Cesar had learned in CSO.
In 1965, the union issue finally exploded. The Agriculture Workers Organization Committee, AWOC, a mostly Filipino union, struck when the Delano grape growers cut the pay rates during the harvest. Chavez quickly became a leader after asking his organization to strike with him and not against him. Though there were picket lines in the fields, the real focus was moved to the cities, where grapes were sold. Thousands of students, religious workers, and labor activists talked to consumers in front of markets, asking them to do a simple thing: help the farm workers by not buying grapes. At its height, over 13 million Americans supported the Delano grape boycott.
In 1969, the pressure was irresistible. The Delano growers signed historic contracts with the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, which later became the United Farm Workers Union, or UFW.
The Delano grape strike later came to be known as La Causa, which means the cause. It didn't matter if you were a farm worker fighting for a better life, or middle-class students trying to change the world. Those who were drawn to the farm workers movement were inspired by Chavez. All these people that put their careers and family to a side to make personal sacrifices was what Cesar was exactly looking for. People who did all they could to help out not just the communities, but the world.
In 1968, he fasted, which was the first ever fast to recommit the movement of non-violence. Fasting was just one expression in his deep spirituality. Like most farm workers, Chavez was a devoted Catholic. His vision of religion was a progressive one that prefigured the preferential option for the poor of liberation theology. In UFW, the Mass was a call to action, as well as a rededication of his spirit.
The 1968 fast marked the beginning of Chavez's emergence on the national political scene. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy came to Delano to break bread with Cesar at the end of his fast. Chavez responded by committing UFWOC to campaign for Kennedy in the California primary. Their voter registration and get out of the vote efforts provided Kennedy's margin of victory in California.
The UFW would become a significant political force, demonstrating that Mexican Americans could and would participate in electoral political when their concerns were at stake. Chavez, understanding the relationship between economic issues and political participation, was a starting point for a growing wave of Latino activism and electoral activity that would eventually lead to the election of thousands of Latino officials and a major shift in the American political landscape.
Chavez had never expected that victory in the battle for farm workers' rights would be achieved during his lifetime. In fact, the first stunning victories in the grapes were followed by major setbacks. The lettuce industry, and then when the grape contracts expired in 1972. Growers sought out that powerful Teamsters union and signed contracts with them that rolled back the UFW's hard-fought gains.
The UFW responded with strikes that led to the jailings of thousands. Many strikers were injured in violent attacks on the picket lines, and 2 were killed in drive-by shootings and attacks. But the inner union battle had left the public confused and made the new boycott against lettuce and grape growers difficult.
Chavez supported Jerry Brown's bid to become governor of California, and in return was able to engineer the nation's first law giving farm workers the right to unionize elections. The Agricultural Labor Relations Act in 1975 led to an overwhelming series of UFW election victories, and it seemed that Chavez had finally achieved his goal of organizing farm workers.
After early successes under the Farm Labor Law, Chavez pulled back from organizing, although he continued to travel extensively to promote awareness of the farm workers' struggle. The election of a Republican governor in 1982 made enforcing the law even more difficult than before.
His goals and visions were changing as well. He began to focus on the danger of pesticides, which had always been a major source of illness among farm workers. It was a subject that drew a positive response from an environmentally conscious public. Instead of using volunteers, he relied more and more on direct mail. Cesar Chavez had become a remarkable symbol for Latinos, community activists, the labor movement, young people, and all who valued his values and commitment. He had accomplished something that no one else had ever been able to do: build a union for farm workers. In the process, he changed a generation of activists who would apply their skills in their communities and struggles.
Cesar Chavez passed away on April 23, 1993, in San Luis. He was 66 years old. There were more than 40,000 people participating in his funeral. In 1991, Chavez received the Águila Azteca, which is Mexico's highest award presented to people of Mexican heritage who have made major contributions outside of Mexico. He became only the second Mexican American to receive this award.
Years before his death, Chavez was asked by a union member if he wanted to be remembered by status and republic memorials. Chavez replied, "If you want to remember me, organize."
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.